He worked as an engineer in the music business, where he's best known for creating the signature special effects guitars that were played by the band Kids. In the 80s, he worked for electronics manufacturers Milton Bradley Company when they were doing electronic games, Simplex, which does fire alarms and building controls, and ISO-Rec, which is power conditioning systems. Robison wrote his first book at age 49. He's active in the autism rights movement, and since 2012, he's been the neurodiversity scholar in residence at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He's also co-chair of the Campus Neurodiversity Committee, which is housed in the President's Office of Diversity. Robison co-teaches neurodiversity courses at the Williamsburg and Washington, D.C. campuses. Also, since 2012, he served as a member of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and you heard that committee mentioned earlier today. The committee is responsible for producing the Strategic Plan for Autism for the federal government and the annual summary of advances in autism research. It reports to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who oversees the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, and the Health Resources Service Administration, HRSA, autism programs. The committee also coordinates autism efforts with other government agencies, including the U.S. Department of Defense, Department of Education, and Social Security Administration. Within that committee and other government committees, Robison is known for taking the position that people with autism should have the lead voice in defining autism research goals. Following his presentation, he'll be taking questions, and there will also be a book signing. So, Mr. Robison.
Well, thank you all for putting this together and for joining me out here today. Seeing these pictures going by on the screen, you might wonder what these pictures have to do with autism, and the answer is that they are autistic art. They're my own pictures, but other than that, they have nothing to do with autism. It's just that when I started speaking at these kinds of conferences, I learned that there were polished professional speakers who came up here and did presentations with this thing called PowerPoint. And they would put up slides and read from the slides. The slides are filled with words and charts and bullet points, and they have laser pointers to make their own points on those. And I thought that I had to have something to show you, but I had no charts and graphs. I have Rolls Royces though, see? And so I decided that I would show people just a gallery of pictures of things that I see in my travels. I've had the great fortune in my life to be able to go all over the world and do all kinds of different stuff. And you know, autism is described in modern culture as a disability. But it's autism that took me all over the world. It has allowed me to be on stage with these performers and to be at these car shows and to come speak to folks like you and see all these places. You know, the first time I came to Detroit and Chicago, in this whole area of the country, was when I was about 18 years old, and I was working with bands playing soul music. And this is like the center of the world for doing that. And some of you that are close to my age, you might remember the Fifth Dimension. Do some of you remember them?
Yeah.
And I just, so I just got an email this morning that in a couple of months I'm actually going to be photographing Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr. from the Fifth Dimension. And so perhaps next time you all see me, you'll see images of them up here. You're going to see in this slideshow, there are images of many soul performers and rappers, and there's rock and roll performers, and there's country musicians, also circus performers and cars and all kinds of other things. I have a kind of a whole other life outside of autism and cars where I photograph performers. But a lot of times people don't associate them with me. You just see the images. Anyway, that's what these are. And when I first came out here doing music, I wasn't doing music because I thought it was like a cool career or anything like that. I was doing music because I wasn't able to get passing grades in school. I was not able to pass math. I was not able to pass English. You might look at me now and see that I've been successful as an engineer, which obviously involves the use of math, and I've been successful as a writer and speaker, which sort of requires at least some command of English. And how could it be that I would fail those courses? For a long time, I thought, well, I just wasn't trying hard enough, or I was just stupid in some ways if I was smart in others. Teachers and other kids made me believe that I was like a second-class person because I couldn't do that. And even as I got older and I was successful, I started feeling like, well, yeah, there's just something wrong with me. I'm a good speaker and I'm able to work in electronics, but well, I just can't do those things, and so I just won't say much about it. That was me in '79. I don't know, what sort of different then. They called me Ampy because I made all the amplifiers. There's, I think somewhere in here there's a slide of some of the amplifiers we made for Pink Floyd along with sound systems. And these are guitars that I did for Kiss and played them on stage in the '70s when they were big. These are not pictures I took. These are obviously old images. But anyway, I have finally come to understand what the problem was with me failing English and failing math. And I think it's a thing that all of you should know and you should think about, because I think it's something that holds back thousands of young autistic people today. I am able to compose clear sentences. I am able to link my sentences into paragraphs. I am able to keep my focus on the idea that I want to convey and keep one paragraph after another flowing and relevant. And that is the key to communicating successfully in words. It doesn't matter what language you speak, that's the essence of successful communication. To teach successful communication, that of course presupposes the person you're trying to teach does not have an innate ability to do it on their own. But if we accept that premise, which I think is flawed, to teach language, you need to develop a set of terms to describe the language. So they come up with nouns and verbs to describe the words. They come up with subjects and predicates and participles and all kinds of other shit. I don't even know the names even now. You know, I have sold millions of books and people read this stuff all over the world and I still don't know this shit. But I can communicate successfully. And that is the essence of why I failed English. Now, a teacher might think, that is nuts. How can you possibly say you know English when you don't even know any of those basic words that a 7th grader should master? And now I see the answer. The answer is that it doesn't make one bit of difference if you know the difference between a noun and a verb. What matters is that you be able to compose a clear, lucid sentence in your mind, make a few of them into paragraphs and express an idea to someone else, and have that other person listen to you and understand you and engage in some back and forth dialogue. It matters that you be able to communicate. Knowing the terms to describe the language does not matter at all to anyone except an English teacher. So the whole idea of English class, if you can master communication, English class does not matter. Well, I told him that in 7th grade. And I'm still saying it. But now, I realize something else. Take math class. You can all hear me, right?
Yeah.
So, you take math class. I designed sound effects for rock and roll bands. I also used an understanding of waves to design complex signal processing here for the US government. I designed things that manipulated waves for all sorts of uses. I did that because to me, the waves were like the beauty of music. I liked to see the patterns of the waves in my head, and I taught myself how electronic circuits would transform the waves, and I taught myself what the transformed waves would sound like. And that allowed me to make electronic circuits that did what I wanted. What it didn't allow me to do is turn it into A's and B's and X's and Y's on a graph. I do not know how to translate my circuits into mathematical descriptions. But you know what? Mathematical descriptions are like nouns and verbs. They do not matter to the practice of engineering if you are able to conceive and manipulate the waves and do it successfully. Or rather, there's one difference between mathematics as an expression of engineering and an English lexicon as an expression of language, and that is that mathematics would allow you to calculate the parameters for a circuit more precisely than I could calculate them in my head. So in principle, one could calculate what they wanted the circuit to do exactly and build it, and it would work right out of the box. And so you might think, well, the person who masters mathematics has a big advantage over a guy like me because they can get it right the first time. But you know what? That's more bullshit that teachers tell you. Because in truth, mathematics will not invent the damn thing in the first place. Someone has to imagine what they want this thing to do. You've got to get in your head that I want to make a guitar sound like the guitar player has been pulled off the stage and he's being swung through space. And you've got to think to yourself, what would it sound like if I pulled the guitar player and threw him over the audience? How would you hear it out there in the audience? And I would manipulate possible circuits and waves in my head, and I would create this thing. How on earth would a knowledge of mathematics help you fulfill that vision? That's the thing. What we teach in school doesn't make people creative. It doesn't make anything. It just describes it. And to fail people who have an innate ability to master that is just wrong. I did a talk years ago where there was a Harvard professor in the audience. And this was only after I had done a number of courses in Harvard continuing medical education, teaching them, and I had participated in a lot of studies with people in Harvard neuroscience. And this fellow, who was a math professor, he said to me, how can you suggest that you have an innate understanding of mathematics when you say that you can't do any math beyond multiplication and division. How can that be? You can't say you know calculus. And in a flash of inspiration, I said, you think that Newton invented the calculus. And that's what everyone says. But today, there's a good number of psychiatrists that read about Newton and his life, and they suggest that he was an autistic fellow like me. Now, there's no way we can know that, but we can certainly read about Newton's eccentricities, and we can say that's consistent with many of us. And what if the truth is that Newton didn't invent anything? What if Newton is a guy like me, and he had that calculus in his head all his life? What if instead of imagining waves that would transform musical signals, maybe Newton imagined waves on the surface of a pond and how they'd do something else? Or maybe Newton imagined gravity as an intellectual exercise. And then, when Newton wanted to explain that to people who couldn't understand it, he devised the calculus that we know today, that some of us know today, not me, obviously. But he devised that as a representational system to describe the beauty of his ideas to people who didn't have the gift of seeing them. Wow, you can imagine that math professor didn't think too much of it. But there were a good many other people who applauded, and I felt like I whooped it like a dog. So, but you know, it's true. Autistic people, for some reason, there are a significant number of us who have an innate ability to figure these things out. Some researchers have suggested to me that perhaps one evolutionary purpose of autistic people is that we are nature's engineers. We can figure out how to model a bridge so that it's strong enough to not collapse, how to model a road, how to model the works of engineering that we needed to progress through history to where we are today. And so, today, when we've decided we're going to send everyone to school, and we're going to send everyone to the same kind of school, you take a little kid like me and some of you, and we learned to read early. And we were gifted readers. And you know, you read my books about how I was reading the encyclopedias when I was 6 years old, and people think that, oh, that's just kind of funny. It's just sort of a humorous anecdote. But you know, it kind of stands to reason that if I was reading those encyclopedias at 6, I probably absorbed more complex language than most 6-year-olds. And somehow, I absorbed how sentences and paragraphs are put together from the stuff I read. And why would that be odd? Because for all of human history, we have learned skills at the side of older masters. Before schools existed, for all time, not only did young humans learn skills at the side of older humans, young dogs learn from old dogs. Anyone who's had a dog and seen the old dog teach the young one where to pee, teach chimps how to groom, and all the other things animals teach themselves and all the things humans teach themselves. So why would it be surprising that an autistic kid could learn that? In principle, any kid could learn that, but some of us autistic people are particularly gifted in that way. So then, imagine that we come to school, and all of a sudden, instead of just the joy of reading in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, we get to junior high school or middle school now, and we are confronted with subjects and predicates and verbs and all these terms. And we don't know the terms, but we know how to put the language together. And the teachers fail us even when our innate ability to do that job should place us at the top of the class. They fail us in English, they fail us in math. The teachers, folks, are doing us wrong in this. And this is something that I didn't grasp for most of my life. I was a reasonably bright guy as a kid, but I believed that I was just fundamentally flawed in many ways. Because of my failures, I believed I was a second-rate person. And I couldn't do what I thought legitimate, regular people do. I wanted to graduate from school and go to college and be a professional person, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't get out of high school. And now I realize it's because the structure of the school system excluded me. There is fundamentally no answer to that problem except a different way of teaching. There's no accommodation that I could ask for to learn those subjects and predicates, and the fact is, they don't matter to a person like me. Not at all. And I think that that is a thing that's just basically incompatible with ideas like the Common Core in American education. But what it says is, if this makes sense to you, it says that there's a shitload of young people like me, like many of you, and we are going to be excluded from education and all that comes in life from being educated unless and until we change that. And no one's going to change it for us. Autistic people and the people who love us are going to have to stand up and make these changes.
That's the truth.
And that is an absolutely vitally important message. I joined a rock and roll band because it was the only thing I could do. I was a high school dropout and a loser, and I was a defective and a dummy and all the bad stuff people said about me. But I could go out on the road and I could make beautiful music. And you know, all the years that I created this musical stuff and these other things that you see, I really believed that the stuff that I did was beneath the interest of a real engineer. I thought a real engineer, he'd be doing something important, not designing stupid musical instruments. And if a real engineer set out to design a musical instrument, he would do it immeasurably better than me. Because that's what people told me. And of course now, I look back on that and I see that that's not true. All the engineering work that I did still speaks for itself quite powerfully. But you know, I was harmed by being told I was no good and worthless, and by being failed in an education system that's fundamentally incompatible with me. And that held me back all my life. And if you don't want young people to grow up and get to be 50 and 60 years old and realize what's been done to them, and I don't want you to think people did this with malice. Nobody did anything to me with malice. These teachers did this with the best of intentions. They really thought, when they said, John, you're a smarter kid than that. You can do better if you just try harder. And no amount of trying harder was going to get me through that. So they didn't mean to harm me, but they did. And the only way a future generation isn't going to be harmed is if we listen to the voices of autistic people who grow up with this. Now, when they asked me to come out here and speak to you, they became famous. That was Destiny's Child years ago. When that's what it looks like when you're ever in on stage.
When they ask me to speak to you?
Yes, they asked me to come out and speak about transition. And transition is a big area of concern. How do autistic people make it through school and from high school into college, and how do they make it into the workplace? Before we can have transition, we have to have schools where we can be successful. That is really, really important. And we are not going to get schools where we can be successful unless autistic people rise up with one voice and speak out for this. One thing that I have learned in what is now 15 years of public autism advocacy, you've heard that I've served for the last 8 years on the committee that makes the strategic plan for autism for the federal government. Before that, I served a number of years on other committees that guide NIH and CDC, and I also have worked with our Justice Department, and I've worked on committees to define autism with the World Health Organization. In doing that, I have seen this enormous diversity of opinion about autism. Some people think, oh, it's just a difference to be celebrated and honored, and others think, oh, autism is a horrible disability, and I wish they would cure it. And some people think autism is this thing that I was born with or my child was born with, and other people think autism is a pharma conspiracy, or it's vaccine poisoning, or it's lead poisoning, or it's all sorts of other things. And people get wrapped up in these disputes. Is it a benign difference, or is it a horrible disability? Well, the fact is, folks, it is what it is in each and every one of us. And this is our life. And whether you believe that you are a victim of pharma conspiracy, or your father's and mother's genes, or God's will, the reality is still the same. You are an autistic person, and you've got to chart your best course forward. No one's going to do this shit for us. And I now see that the most important thing that you can do when you engage in advocacy, and I absolutely urge you to engage in advocacy for transition and for our civil rights and for everything for our community, when you talk to somebody about autism, instead of engaging them in an argument about is it a horrible disability or is it a benign difference, is it a gift, is it a disability and exceptionality, we should recognize that autism is all of those things. It can be all of those things to any one of us. It can be more one thing to you than it is to me. But autism is a wide range of things to all different kinds of people. We should also recognize that the science shows us some things. Science, for example, has not supported the idea that autism is caused by vaccines. But when I say that to somebody, and they say, well, can you prove that? No, I can't prove that. I can only say that science doesn't support that. But what I would also say to you is it shouldn't matter what I believe and what you believe. You're welcome to believe that your son's autism is caused by vaccine. All I ask of you is that you consider that your son is getting old. I am already old. I am immediately concerned about what's going to happen to autistic people in their 60s. You as a mother should be very concerned about what's going to happen to your autistic son in his 20s, and in his 30s, and in his 40s. And you should be concerned when you are gone, who will take care of your son? My parents are gone, and I have to take care of myself. And I have an autistic son who's 29. And I share the worries of all you mothers out there and fathers. And so, if we agree on that, which we should be able to join together in a quest for the best quality of life for autistic people that we love, whether that's ourselves or whether it's our family members. We should absolutely be able to put aside questions about who caused the autism and who done us wrong, and we should work together for a better life. We should be able to put aside whether at this moment you think it's a horrible disability and the worst thing in the world, and I think it's what allowed me to go out and be successful in music. Because you know, there's been plenty of times in my life that autism has really, really sucked. And I understand if you feel that way now, because I felt that way too. But whether though we have a different view of autism this second, shouldn't change our united purpose to make our lives better. It shouldn't change the fact that if we need a different educational system to succeed in school, together we are a hell of a lot more likely to change it than any of you are alone. And the other thing I would urge you to think about is there are some things that even if you believe them, maybe you should keep them to yourself. Now, it's not for me to tell you specifically what to do, but I know a few of you are old enough to have gotten divorced. I have a lot of experience with that. I had 2 wife turnings and 3 marriages here, so that's right. Wives turn and then you get divorced. Now my wife today says, well, part of your problem is that you don't always recognize that you have a role in it too. So I will concede, you being a female, but there are other females out there that are kind of thinking that too. But still, if you go through that process, one of the things that you're going to hear from the counselors that you're either going to see voluntarily or that the court's going to force you to see, they're going to say to you, you may think your ex-spouse is the worst human being ever, but remember that your child is half you and half her, or half him as the case may be. And so, every time your child comes home and you say, your dad is such a lowlife, your dad is no good, I hate your dad for this, every time you say that, you are eating something away in your child. And if you love your child more than anything, you should be aware of that. Now just think for a moment. How do you think it differs for you to say, your dad is a worse piece of shit, to I hate this autism, I hate it. And I hate it that you are vaccine poisoned, or you are damaged by disease when I was pregnant. Which of you would want to be damaged by a damn disease? That's the thing. Maybe we're disabled. Maybe we're gifted. Who in this room would want to embrace saying, I'm damaged by disease? Do you want to go through life as a victim, or do you want to go through life as a champion? Do you want to grow your kids to think that? If you want to grow your kids to be champions, don't make us victims and losers. I'm not going to tell you not to feel any one way about where autism came from. I will tell you from my experience in the World Health Organization. Do any of you want to hazard a guess as to what the most widely held belief in the world about where autism came from is? Who would hazard a guess of that? Genetics? Vaccines?
Environmental?
Environment? Well, that's because, I guess, we're Technologist America. By far the most widely held belief about autism cause, autism comes from God, the spirits, or the ancestors. By far the most widely held belief. And you know, people who believe God made him that way somehow are able to accept it. And I think that's a thing that we have a real problem with in America. There are also a significant number of people in America who say evolution made him that way. And I accept that. Whatever you believe, I'm not going to try and change your belief, because we don't know all the answers. And nobody can stand up here and say they've got all the answers. And furthermore, science tells us that there are many, many paths into autism. And indeed, there are associations between genetics. My father was autistic and so was my son. There are connections between maternal illness and autism. There are connections between infant illness and autism. There are connections between injury and autism. There are even connections with the grandmother's toxic exposures and autism. So there are all these possibilities. And maybe I inherited my autism from my dad. Probably not your dad. But you know, your autism might come from somewhere else. It's not for me to know, and at this point, it's not for anyone to know. But the thing we should all be united in is joining together in advocacy. The idea of neurodiversity has become a big thing in autism advocacy. Have all of you heard about neurodiversity?
Yeah.
So, one thing that people often fight about online is it diversity or is it disability? And I think that when you consider how to talk about this, neurological diversity is a fact of life. There are some people who have mathematical minds and some who are very emotionally intuitive, and there are some who have great memories and some who seem to have no memory at all. Those are all examples of neurological difference. Some of you have blonde hair, some of you have red hair, some of you have black hair. There's all kinds of diversity. But with every kind of diversity, there is a point where the diversity becomes so extreme that most people would not describe it as diversity, but as pathology. So if I am 6.5 feet tall and you're 5 feet tall, we are both within the range. You might stand next to me and people will say, boy, she's a lot shorter than you are. But there's a lot of couples out there going through life perfectly happily with that kind of height difference. Now, if I was 8 feet tall, or you were 3 feet tall, there is a significant likelihood that there would be medical complications associated with our being at the extremes of the height range. And I think the very same thing could be said in autism. There's a broad range of neurological difference where we have the potential to just blend in with everyone else. And we might be oblivious to emotional cues, we might be a little bit cognitively impaired, and might be a little bit gifted. We could be a wide range of things. But within that, we can just blend in. Then there are people whose neurology is so different that they stand out. And in almost any culture, they would be said to be disabled in some key way. For example, if you cannot talk, you would be described as disabled in most contexts. But it doesn't change the fact that that's all neurological diversity. I think that we need to recognize when we talk to other people that even though neurological diversity is a fact, the extremes of neurological diversity can bring with them a substantial amount of suffering. Even though I have not lived my life as a person with serious intellectual disability or an inability to communicate my ideas, I'm lucky that I'm gifted about communicating my ideas. I'm very willing to accept that a person who lives in frustration because he can't communicate his ideas is going to suffer from his autism in key ways that I don't suffer. And I wouldn't question for a minute that he's got a problem I don't have. And if you were that person, or you were that person's mother or father or caretaker, you might say, yeah, well, you can just say you're diverse, but this man here, he needs help. And I can't disagree with you. It doesn't change the fact of neurological diversity, it just changes the context in which you see it. And I guess what I would ask all of you, in standing up for our civil rights and in helping us make our way in the world, recognize that the lived experience of autism is really, really different for all of us, and there is no right and wrong answer. I see in these places, when I go out and speak, I see what look to me like pretty significantly disabled people, and they come up to me and they say, I'm proud to be part of this community, and look at this stuff I'm doing, and I'm making art, and I'm writing things, and I'm posting stories, and I just had this thing published. And sometimes they say that stuff to me, not with their voices, but by standing in front of me and punching the words on an iPad, and the iPad says it to me. And I think, well, in that case, technology has set them free, but they have a fundamentally positive view of themselves and where they are in the world. And then I see other people who appear to me to have less disability, but of course, who are you or I to know how much disability another person has? We can't tell who's going to kill themselves tomorrow, and that's the strongest possible proof of serious disability, wouldn't you say? If we can't guess that, none of us can know. But I see people who don't seem real disabled, and yet they just absolutely hate autism, and they hate who they are. And I guess I think that's sad. I guess I wish that they could feel better about themselves. But the only thing we can do is to accept that there are people who have these very different views about autism, and we should make room for them in our community. We should not say, just because you think autism sucks, or just because you believe vaccine caused autism, that we won't welcome you in our community. I urge all of you to recognize that if you want to serve as a public advocate, advocate means that you advocate for all people in our community. That is a thing that we are at great risk of losing in America, especially with our political climate. When we elect someone to the Senate, there is increasingly the idea that I'm going to elect the guy who agrees with me on abortion, I'm going to elect the guy who agrees with me on taxes, or I'm going to elect the guy that agrees with me on jobs. But you know, a person who stands for election should recognize that they have really a sacred duty to represent all of us fairly to the best of our ability. The reason I'm saying all this to you is that I'm going to be retiring from government service. And you folks, several of you I've been so proud to see, folks that are 30, 35 years old in the audience, autistic advocates, you're here making things, and you're doing stuff, and you're talking to people, and you're the ones that are going to take my place. And when I went into government service, I believed that I should stand up for my views. But now I realize that when I serve on a committee like the IAC, or a committee like the World Health Organization to define autism, I am not defining autism for me, I am defining the autism for the world. I am recommending autism policy for the United States, not for John Robison. And that means that I have to recognize that you have just as much right to your opinions, whether I agree with them or not, as I do. It does not really matter if I agree with you. If I am appointed to represent you, I have a duty to do that. And you know, since I've recognized that, my success in engaging people has really been transformed. And if there is a secret that I would impart to you in this business of civil rights and in transition, it is that no one is going to help us except ourselves. And we are not going to get anywhere helping ourselves unless we can pull together and make a community. And you know, autism is at its heart described as a communication disability. So maybe it's going to be harder for us to make a community than it is for people tied together by something else. But it doesn't change the fact that we have to do it. Autism is our reality, and we have to do this. It is really, really important. Another idea that I would like to impart to you, is this too rambling a thing, or is it making sense to you? Is it okay? Okay. So, one of you asked me to talk about transition and neurodiversity. An important thing about neurodiversity, and these are all things I've kind of realized late in my life, so you might not have heard me talk about them much before, is that people with neurological differences have always been here.
Yeah.
You know, you see me as a very visible autistic person, and I talk about my father being autistic and my son. My son is somewhat visible. My father died 13 years ago. Both my parents were neurodivergent. I now realize that I have uncles and cousins, all with autism. And you know, when I was a little boy in Georgia, my grandparents would tell me to stay away from Malcolm and my other idiot cousins because they were deaf and dumb or they were idiots. And I now realize that that was the word in the South for what is almost certainly autistic people who couldn't speak.
That's the truth.
And we would play together, we'd roll around, you know, and we'd fight, and we'd do stuff kids would do. But you know the sad thing? All these deaf and dumb and idiot cousins of mine, they're all dead. So I'm going to be 62 this year, and I'm like the last one standing. So if you worry what happens to us in old age from that, you're right to worry. What goes wrong with us? I think that's something that it's going to behoove every single one of you with a personal stake in autism to want to find those answers. You know, when psychiatrists coined the word autism, the word was meant to describe a way in which some people seem to be withdrawn into their own world. So autism was a term coined by doctors to describe dysfunction. There was no idea at the dawning of the autism diagnosis about exceptionality. I told you that I served on World Health Organization committees to develop, one of them was the Autism ICF core set, which is part of the package of definitions for autism for the world. And in developing the core set, for the first time in the World Health Organization's history, we published a paper describing autism and ADHD as conveying disability and exceptionality. Every other trait the World Health Organization had cataloged and described was described by measuring how your function was diminished from the norm. There was never a plan to describe superior functioning in the context of what they called a psychiatric disorder. So we in autism set that precedent. But that was not on the minds of people who invented the word. The people who invented the word were only thinking about disability. And think about how an autism diagnosis comes about. Whether you're the autistic person like me, or you're a parent or a person who works in a school, many of you are librarians. So you see a kid who's not acting right, maybe it's your kid who's not acting right, And acting not right, of course, can mean many different things. And you have a conversation perhaps with a pediatrician, and maybe it goes from the pediatrician to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and you discover that this kid has autism. It is sort of like when you are 21 years old and you discover you have syphilis. You do not want to have syphilis, and you do not want to have autism. The whole idea is that you are diagnosed because you failed. Who wants to fail? None of us want to fail. So autism, when we say we have to remove the stigma, the only way we're going to remove the stigma is we're going to throw the word out. Now, I'm not going to suggest that autism should not be used as a descriptive term. Autism has a lasting place in the medical lexicon to describe part of our way of being. But autism is at its heart a diagnostic term for diminished function. You get diagnosed with autism not because of your exceptionality, but because of the specific things you can't do. You cannot get an autism diagnosis, according to all the diagnostic rules, unless you have a significant impairment of function. Now, impairment of function can mean many different things. In my case, impairment of function could mean that I fail to sustain romantic relationships. Maybe I'm my present age and I'm alone because no one will go out on a second date with me because I can't say or do the right things. You know, it's easy to laugh at that, but that's the kind of thing that leads to suicide. So we need to take that kind of stuff seriously. In another person, a disability diagnosis might be given because that person couldn't speak. You could say, well, he has a more obvious disability than me, but the fact is disability, in both the examples I gave you, is real. So autism diagnoses are given in that context, and because of that, they're always going to have a negative stigma. In response to that, people who are autistic said, hey, we are more than collections of disabilities. Other groups that we compare ourselves to are not generally stigmatized in that way. People don't think, for example, that gay people are failed heterosexuals. People do not think that Jewish people are failed Catholics. But somehow, people do think that autistic people are failed normal people. And that's the thing that many of us really, really object to. And one response to that is to say, what if we come up with a different term? And that is what led us to embrace this idea of neurodiversity. So when people talk to you about the controversy between autism and neurodiversity, I don't think there needs to be a controversy. I think that you can say, if this is true, you could say, I got diagnosed with autism in 2007 at USC Medical Center. I got diagnosed with autism when I was 4 years old by my pediatrician. That's fine. But you could also say that I identify as a neurodivergent person. Just as you could say, I identify as trans, or you could say, I'm Native American, or I'm Jewish. The difference is that one word is a medical diagnosis, and the other word is a statement of identity. When you say, I was diagnosed with autism, what comes to mind? When you say those words, or you say, my daughter was just diagnosed with autism, the other person says, oh my, I'm sorry to hear that. If, on the other hand, you say, I'm autistic and I'm proud. I'm a proud neurodivergent person. Now, some people will say, what's neurodivergent? Other people will say, hey man, that's cool. There's a fundamental difference in how that comes across. One is a statement that's like a diminishment of us, and the other is empowering. So when you want to know what to do to help ourselves, what to do to help young people make the transitions, take away the stigma by embracing this neurodiversity idea. Recognize that neurodiversity isn't all sweetness and light. There's a lot of nasty disability in neurodiversity. Sometimes people will say online, are pedophiles neurodivergent? Are serial killers neurodivergent? Well, the hard truth is, yes, they are. If we believe that those people act that way because of neurological difference, as opposed to feeling that they are perfectly rational people acting in response to things that happen in life, it would be fair to say that, yes, they are neurodivergent. A person who is attracted to children, that is probably a neurological difference, just like a guy who's attracted to women or a guy who's attracted to guys. Nobody wants to talk about that stuff, but it doesn't make it untrue. So when people say that as a criticism of neurodiversity, I think we need to accept that that is part of the reality. Reality isn't always pretty. And if we can accept that, and we can say, yeah, well, there's stuff about neurodiversity that I don't like. There's stuff about Judaism I don't like. There's stuff about Catholicism I don't like. But it doesn't mean that I don't believe in it with all my heart and stand for it. And I urge you to do the same thing, because we have to take away the stigma. We have to cause young people, like some of you in the audience, and older people like me, who are just quiet autistics that aren't speaking out, we need those people to stand up and be public role models for young people. We need those people to go into schools and tell the schools how we've been hurt by flawed teaching methods that just aren't compatible with us. And we need to do more than just go to your local school and talk to the teachers. I urge you, do what I have done. Start out talking to your local school, that's great. But get yourself on the steering committees for the U.S. Department of Education if you want to make a difference. Go change it at the federal level, and that's where you will see lasting difference. And for those of you who believe in it as much as me, you're going to devote 10 or 20 years of your life to doing that. This stuff doesn't change fast. You are going to see how painfully slow progress is changing the federal government. But, I know. But you know, we can do this. I can already see changes from my own advocacy, and I am really, really proud of that. And I feel like my generation of people has opened the door to the young people who are here, and we absolutely support you. Myself, Stephen Shore, Temple Grandin, Dina Gassner, Leanne Holliday-Wiley, all the other folks in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, we are absolutely behind you. And this is a really, really important mission. So I guess you might have hoped that I would have some simple A, B, and C things that you could go back and do in libraries and schools. I don't have that. What I have is the idea that you can get autistic people who are older to come out of the closet, recognize autism, take pride in neurodiversity. You don't have to be proud of autism as a disability. You can be proud of diversity and to be part of the diversity that drives mankind forward. That doesn't have a word of disability in it. Be proud of that. And when you're proud of that, stand up and be a role model for young people. And then you're going to get young people coming into your libraries and schools, and they're going to feel proud and empowered. People are going to feel good. People who believe in us are going to help us. We are going to help ourselves. And I hope that every one of you is part of it. So that is my message to you for today. They have allowed half an hour for questions. Hopefully, I haven't overwhelmed you with this bombardment of ideas, because you might have come here thinking that I would tell you a story that had like a beginning in childhood and an end today, and I didn't really do that. But I hope I've given you things to think about. And so who has questions anyway?
I do.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for being so transparent, saying that it's up to the community and the autistic community to be self-advocates and, you know, actually just speak their mind and say what it is and how it is. Because a lot of people with autism really don't have the language to be so forthright as you are. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for that. I know that I am gifted in being able to string words together. And you know, that's a really ironic thing, because even today, I can craft an explanation better than most people, but you know, I can't look at you and tell if you're mad at me. I can't look at you and tell if you're happy. I have no clue about that kind of communication, even though my ability to use words to express ideas is way better than most people. But in that other form of communication, I don't know. And I guess that's the thing about autism in us. It's just we're so good in some things and so not in others.
That's
You
life.
had a question? Yes.
Yes, my interest is in autistic adults in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. That's where I want to go. What would you say to people who want to advance that now and do practical things for people who need things today while we're waiting for progress to happen?
Well, I think the first tip to advance there is keep eating so you don't starve. And I think that once you get to that point, I think we need to continue pushing our government to do more studies on autistic adults. I published a paper which I presented at the last IAC meeting on why we need to study prevalence and autistic outcomes in adults, and I suggested that we need to commit upwards of $10 million to do that, like the CDC's ADDM study on 8-year-old children and autism. So I think that is important. Another thing that I think is really interesting, I told you that my cousins, most of whom I think were autistic, are dead now, most of them. Of course, my father and mother dead. And my first wife, Little Bear, who appears in Look Me in the Eye, and she was the one who made those Kiss guitars and stuff with me back in the 70s. She died 5 years ago. I think in seeing what's happened, I think that a lot of us have less awareness of our bodies. So even though we are generally said to be smart people, the evidence in my family is that we don't know necessarily when things are bad wrong with us, and therefore we might not seek medical help before it's too late. A lot of us have non-standard sensitivities to pain and discomfort, and in ordinary circumstances that may not matter much, but in extreme circumstances it means that we might be vulnerable to, say, freezing to death or dying for something else, where a person who wasn't autistic would have said, this is a bad situation, I need to get out of it. And I also think that we fail to communicate things. A lot of us are scared to go to doctors, and we endanger our lives by not seeking medical treatment. I see all those things play out in my life and in my family. And so I guess I would ask, do we have basic medical vulnerabilities and psychiatric vulnerabilities? I think we have both. And then the other big psychiatric vulnerability is that autistic people are far more vulnerable to depression and anxiety. And those are things from which we truly suffer. And those are principal drivers of suicide. And so So I think more knowledge will help us, but I think that if you're a person like me, for example, some of you might know that I had to have a heart operation a year ago for arrhythmia, and I wasn't aware of a condition that was like, you know, could have killed me. And if I wasn't aware of it, I'm not sure how I can give you a quick tip so you'll be aware. I think that's the only thing I guess I can say to you is that the best protection you could have is to have some kind of companion in your life who watches you closely, and you gotta hope that that person's more observant than you are. I don't know how we will answer it in ourselves. Yes?
I know we've met before,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you were at the thing last year too, yeah?
yeah, and I have high functioning autism, and I actually have two questions. One is, I've had like periods of deep depression and low self-esteem and suicidal thoughts, and you mentioned that, and I wondered if you personally had experienced those at any time, like in your teens or 20s or something like that. Because that, for me, that was the worst time, and I know that a lot of people in college experience those dips in depression and ego, and you talked about it, and I wondered if that was a personal, I mean, I know this is a personal question, but if that was something you had experienced and you knew it a little bit about.
Yes, I'm sorry to say it is. I have written about being suicidal and being in a state of collapse in my life in my book, Switched On. And I wish it were otherwise, but I still have those feelings. And
Me too.
I think that I'm going to guess that most of us autistic people, if we are truthful, feel like maybe we should just give up and die now, or maybe we'll go to sleep and we won't wake up tomorrow. And I think that the majority of us probably feel that way. I don't know what to say, because I think that this advocacy that I do, I really believe in everything I say to you. And I have done the absolute best that I can to go out and stand up for autistic people and stand up for our rights. But if you ask, does it make me happy? No, it doesn't. Happiness is a thing that I can't find in my life. I can do things that people say are good, but I don't know how to find that. And I think that is the essence of what you are asking me. And I wish I knew the answer, but I believe we can do right, even so.
You talked about doing the advocacy at the federal level.
Yeah.
I mean, how would somebody like me be able to even start to do that?
Well, how are you different than me? Just an autistic person, right? That's all I was. I wrote a book.
Smarter than I am.
What's that?
You're a lot smarter than I am.
How do you know I'm smarter than I? How do you know?
I've talked to you, I know you're smarter than I am.
You're smart.
Without getting into an argument about it. Right? How old are you?
I was born in January 1956.
56.
I know my date of birth, my age changes.
Are you a 50s
Magic
mom?
too, girl.
Yeah, I'm
You go
in my
backwards.
50s.
Yeah, okay, all right. So
Man, go backwards.
I spent a lot of my life thinking that other people were smarter than me. And I felt like, when I was young, I felt like people were successful, like getting legitimate jobs, going to college and going to work, which I couldn't do because they were smarter. So I guess I asked with the same words that you have used. I said to those people, how can I do this? You are smarter than me. You went to school. You did this. But shit, all I am is an autistic guy who dropped out of high school, and I wrote books and I talked to people. And I didn't start writing about autism. A lot of people don't realize that that I actually, when I started to make money from my car business when I was in my late 30s. And I didn't even know about autism at that time. And I wanted to help young people in the community because I had grown up in a pretty abusive, dysfunctional household. If you read my brother's book, Running with Scissors, you know that we grew up with bent priests and diddling, you know, older friends and all this kind of stuff. And I realized that it's easy to get somebody to go to a shelter for abused kids and talk about being an insurance agent or a policeman, but it's not so easy to get somebody to go there and say, hey, I was an abused kid too, and I left home and I showed them all and I started a car repair business right here in the city, and you can do this too. But I started going out and doing that to speak for other disadvantaged young people when I was in my 30s. And then when I learned about autism, I thought, boy, that's even more meaningful than the other, and I better talk to autistic people. And I couldn't find any autistic people, and that's what led me to write a book. But in principle, there is no difference between you and me. You could follow the exact same path that I followed. You too could go talk in classes, in schools here. You could talk about being an autistic person. You could talk, there are absolutely different issues to being female and autistic that I don't live. You can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw each other at the
I know, yeah.
You saw a little bit of me giving
Yep.
a presentation.
Right.
That's not at the federal level, I mean.
It's not at the federal level because you didn't get there. For Christ's sake, we all have to start somewhere. You've got to go and do that. And one day you're going to talk to somebody, and that person is going to be like a state senator, and that person's going to say, hey, you need to come to the Capitol and tell that to the Senate. And when you go there and you tell that to the Senate, one of those persons is going to go to Washington and say, why don't you volunteer to be a reviewer on an NIH committee?
I got it.
And you just have to follow the path.
Right to your conversation.
You absolutely should not sell yourself short. Any one of you can do that. This advocacy is not about exceptional people doing it. It's about determined people doing it. Yes?
I just wanted to give an example because you heard me talk about my son Jeremy, who's nonverbal this morning. He got asked to give one ability awareness talk to a local school. And then because he sees emotion as color, well, one school wanted to pay him. He said, no, I do it for free. I said, well, why not buy a painting? So now he visits the grammar schools. He sees the students, paints the colors of the schools, comes back and does a presentation. You won't believe how many talks he's been asked to give around the state level and at higher places, and also even just for the individual kids. They see somebody, and I've had feedback from parents and teachers who say, oh, that my kid came back from school for the first time, and he said, I met this guy at school, and if he could do this, I could do this. And so your words are really important, and you think that you have nothing to say, but you have a heck of a lot to say.
That is absolutely true. Every one of you has a potential to do this stuff that I've gone out and done. Every one of you can do that. Yes?
I have to say I really appreciate what you said about opinions and how everyone's got their own opinion, and in the end what really matters is that we are like advocating, we're all working together. Because there's like, there's so many clashing opinions and people like attacking each other over them. And it's like, we're not like,
Yeah,
them here. Like,
it's really hard to do, but that is you got to do that. That is really, I'm glad you feel that way.
have you ever heard of Daryl Davis?
I don't think so.
He's an African-American man who started, basically got to know some people from the KKK, like just sat down and just had a chat with them. They just like got to know each other, and then from them just getting along in spite of their obviously different like opinions, at some point the KKK member he was talking to, who was like, he was like a high up guy, eventually resigned because he realized like this is crazy that we're in this, hate group, because I'm actually getting to know this guy and he seems just fine. So I feel like just by talking to each other and like, regardless of what our opinions are, we can reach a point where like we're respecting each other.
Well, I think that is really important. You know, I talk to people of all persuasions, and I feel like I've been able to become friends with lots of them. And I would also say to you that, you know, you all laughed about, you know, the state government in the country, and you know how polarized it is, but when I go to these committees in Washington, you don't see that polarization in the operation of the National Institutes of Health, or the operation of the Justice Department, or the operation of the Department of Defense. What you see in those places are committed federal employees that believe in their missions. There is really not a big Democrat-Republican aspect to that. The Democrat-Republican aspect is more like what services they're gonna vote to deliver in your state or another state. But if you are in advocacy like I am, you will not encounter a lot of that business. So yeah, you were.
So just to like roll back to libraries, and we were talking about the medical struggles that are often in the autism community and helping autistic adults. Autistic adults are so often, I think, still deeply underdiagnosed.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So if a library is like, we want to have programming for autistic adults, you can't advertise it that way. Because you're not, people, first off, there are people who just aren't diagnosed, haven't even thought about it. You're not going to reach the people. So I was thinking when you were talking about like the medical struggles, in libraries, something that's popular right now is having like life skills for kids who are coming out of high school and into college. And having something like that, like how to call, you know, how to get insurance, how to call a doctor's office, get an appointment, things like that, would be great for older adults as well who haven't practiced those skills.
So,
But there's, but the one thing that I would love to hear from you guys too is the shame involved with coming to a library to learn those skills
well,
when
you
you're
know,
in your 30s and 40s.
if you could, there's certain things that you could do that would not have like the shame with them. I first of all, I think that is a really excellent idea. At William and Mary, we thought the same thing some years ago, and we thought we will make a series of videos for autistic students who are coming to school about what to expect in a lab class, what to expect in a lecture class, the hidden rules of meeting with a professor. Because we figured, well, autistic students coming to school, they're not going to know those things. And I thought that would be, you know, a good thing, and I'm an autistic person. But some of the autistic students were outraged at it. And they said, so what are you thinking with this? This is like making a video about how black people should behave at William and Mary. Is that the message you want to send? And I realized that that's true. That if you make a video and you direct it at autistic people, black people, Jewish people, whatever, you single them out, why? It would be one thing if you made a video and it was about, this is a description of Jewish services available on the William and Mary campus. But a video about how Jewish people should behave on campus is entirely another matter. And that's how people took the autism video, and of course then we talked about it and we realized that 75% of the incoming freshmen, if not 90%, have no idea how to have a meeting with a professor. And so then we thought that what the students want in a college like that, they want information on how to succeed in classes with professors, and they want to know how to make friends that succeed in romantic and personal relationships. And so if you, like you talked about executive function skills, and if you presented a course on executive function skills, that carries a stigma. But making friends in Madison, Wisconsin, what kind of stigma does that have? You know, I mean, you say that you're going to do a weekly get-together on making friends for 40-somethings and then for 50-somethings and 60-something in your city. And within that structure, you could develop things like executive function, and if you get interested in that, you could then expand your courses, and you would have gotten over the stigma because you're doing something that everyone wants. I think that in a library, if your library is in a college setting, it would be just like at William and Mary, where meeting professors and stuff would be of interest. But if it is a community library, then I think the thing that's going to drive people is making friends. And if you are able to do that, and so if you wonder what could I do to make friends, one thing you could do is you could look at a curriculum called Peers, P-E-E-R-S, and it's from Dr. Liz Laugesen at UCLA. It is a public domain thing, so you could get a Peers workbook. You could go out to UCLA and do a couple weeks and get trained as a Peers facilitator, and you could do a Peers group in your library. I guarantee you that if you did that, that would be a thing with significant impact in your community. You don't advertise it necessarily for autistic people, but maybe what you do, say you do Peers making friends for teenagers. And what you do is you call the autism coordinator or special ed director at local high schools, tell them you're doing that, and then invite the community. And you'll get a bunch of autistic people, you'll get some people in the community. Because in truth, why should you limit it to autistic people? Everyone will benefit. We autistic people are no more than the canaries in the coal mine in this regard. We do indeed have more social problems. You know, I said to you a few minutes ago, I can't look at them and tell if they're happy or sad. But probably most of you that have a husband, you can say, well, my husband can't tell if I'm happy or sad either, right? So to a large extent, these problems are universal. They're just a matter of degree. And I think that is an excellent, excellent thing that you suggested there. Also, I feel like you've allowed me to give real value to librarians, because librarians are here. They wanted me to have some kind of suggestion. While we are on that topic, since you specifically asked about executive function, there is another therapy that you can teach actually in the library, and that is called unstuck and on target. If you Google that phrase, you'll find that unstuck and on target was developed initially as an executive function teaching strategy for teaching preschoolers, but you will see if you read it that you can apply that very successfully to full-grown people. And they are now extending Unstuck into adult teaching. And so those are examples of the kinds of therapies that I'm proud to have supported in my government service. I have pushed our public health agencies to fund the development of stuff like that. When you hear me say we need more research that truly benefits the community and less research about genetics and causation, because all of us who are autistic, we are still going to be autistic even with more genetic knowledge, and if you change our ability to make friends, you change our lives. And you guys are the next generation to do that. So yes.
In your experience, is there some kind of central priority database that those of us who are ready to advocate can go, okay, well, this is what, you know, someone with a big overview has agreed we should all be working on our communities,
Yes.
so I'll focus on this first, and then let's focus on this?
Well, I wouldn't tell you what you should focus on, because you may be in a community that has its own specific problems, you know, and those may be paramount for you. But in general, if you want to know what the concerns are for autism for the country, our committee is iacc.hhs.gov, and all of our meetings are archived, and they are all searchable. So you can go in the search box and you could search on, for example, presentation on suicide, presentation on aging. You could search on a particular name if we invited a speaker, and they would bring up those results. You can download the strategic plan for autism. Every year we update the strategic plan and we deliver that to the Congress. In the plan, we ask a series of questions. How will I detect autism? How does it, what are the issues of autism through the lifespan? What are we going, basically what do we want to do next? And those are the questions that our public health agencies seek to answer through research. So we elaborate on exactly what our concerns are with respect to all those questions in the strategic plan, which is updated every year. And then, as a companion to that, we provide what we call the summary of advances. And that is, we report the most significant pieces of autism research, whether it's basic research or services or delivery. And then finally, we have what's called the portfolio analysis tool. You can type portfolio analysis tool into the search box and it'll bring it up. So if you wonder, for example, how much money did the US government spend on genetics research last year? How much did the government spend on autism and criminality research? How much did we spend on autism and anything at all? You can type that into there, and that'll bring up studies that relate to that, and then the portfolio analysis tool will allow you to see how our autism research budget has been allocated. And of course, if you disagree with the allocation, you can come to Washington and you can make a comment. That's another thing that I should have said to you. Every one of you can sign up as a public commenter, and you can come to IAC and you can have your 5 minutes to stand before the committee and express your ideas. I would urge you to think about what you want to say, but that's another thing that I really have taken seriously, the public's right to be heard.
That's right.
And you can come and you can speak your mind. And that's all available on the website.
So like I'm at the University of Illinois.
Yeah?
I could do research. I could promote smart autistic students to do research or something like that. I mean, so is it feeding down from the strategies that you set to saying, hey, are any students at the U of I willing to research this? Because as far as I know, people just take PhD topics out of the air or whatever.
Well, one thing you could do, mostly, researchers seek funding. And so if you are a researcher and you are seeking funding, one thing I tell people is that if you read or you listen to the discussions of the IAC in our meetings, when you hear people like me talk about this or that thing as an important priority and we should be studying it, you should be considering that when the NIH listens to that, the NIH program managers are taking notes of these things, and that is how ideas move from discussion at the IAC to a request for a research proposal. So let's say you hear us talking in the committee about a question about older people and epilepsy. And there's a discussion, and there's a lot of us around the table, and we agree that this is a thing that we should really be worried about. We don't know enough about that. If you, as a scientist who was working in epilepsy, if you prepared a grant proposal to research epilepsy in older autistic people, you would really have a jump on the competition. And that's an example of a legal way you can get advanced knowledge of what the government will ask you to bid for. Watch the transactions of the committee, and then be ready to research those things. And that applies to you or your grad students, absolutely. Also, if you're talking about researching and getting funding, you might want to join the International Society for Autism Research, which is INSAR. I am actually a board member of INSAR, so I provide autistic perspective to the board. At INSAR, we hold workshops at our annual conference on how to get funding. We have opportunities to meet with NIH grant officers. We have sessions on that kind of stuff. So if you were serious about seeking funding from the federal government, we have programs on that in the society. Are we out of time, or are we okay? Okay, so I take one more question?
Yes.
Do you want to pick the last question? You're going to do it, okay. Okay.
I think somebody right in front has it.
Okay,
I'm a pediatrician,
Yep.
and I see an incredible deficit of the transition from adolescence into adult years after high school. In terms of guiding parents, it's for us to handle families, we have a relationship with us, to find adult medical providers is difficult, but to guide families on what their resources are of how to transition to adult years is very hard.
That is-
So we rely on agencies, but we need more support there. We need, we could keep a kid in high school till 21 if they're physically disabled, but to say, can we do life skills support for a child with autism in those years, that's not even on the table. And I guess what I'm saying is that we need more help in transition at state and federal level, and what funding we need to provide for life skills, social skills, executive functioning skills, those things, because they're not being taught in schools.
I agree with you.
And group home, and SSI, and
Yep.
Medicaid waiver, and
So
all of those things.
if you look at the strategic plans, from IAC for the last 4 years, you will see that we have taken an increasingly strong stance that it is time for our public health agencies to shift a significant focus of our autism research budget to specifically life conditions and deliverable services for transition into adulthood and then adult and lifespan issues. So we are absolutely aware of that. The other autistic people involved in IAC and in other committees are aware of that. But this is a thing where we are fighting a great deal of inertia because there's a big community of autism scientists who are in genetics and biology and chasing this, what I think is kind of a false dream of curing a genetic disorder. And the majority of our research funds have gone to basic biology and genetics, which have zero impact on what you have just said. And at the same time, we have this groundswell of what is now outrage in the community that we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars and nothing is done to address the problems you are articulating. And I think that message is finally getting through to government. I have people like the directors of federal agencies saying to me in these meetings that they recognize that we have fundamentally failed in our duty to Americans who live with autism. And we need to change that situation. But the only way they are going to know that situation needs changing is if you and others step out and make it known. Because these geneticists and biologists that took over all the research in the early days, they were medical people doing what they knew best. These weren't malicious or tricky. I mean, they just were doing what they do best, and it wasn't what we want. And we weren't speaking. And unless we speak, things will not change.
That's the truth.
So you've got to go out there and you've got to fight for that. And you will see, if you read the transactions of the IAC, that I am a strong fighter for all the things that you say. But you got to do it too. It's not just me. So with that, I guess I'm going to go out and sign books. They've given you all my books, so bring them out and I'll sign them for you. And thank you so much for joining me here today.